Tonight, rumours, theories, gossip. It's what makes the political world go round. Tonight, we'll try to distinguish the fanciful from the facts. Our political editor is standing by with his analysis of what's likely to happen next. We'll also speak to the parties waiting for the DUP to jump and assess what the latest developments could mean for everyday life here. And we've reunited editors from the three main papers to hear their thoughts on the continuing waiting game in the run-up to the holidays. Hello, it's still a case of will he, won't he this evening as we wait to find out if the DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson is going to recommend to party colleagues that they call off their Stormont boycott. Talks have continued throughout the week and we are told the mood music is positive. Let's get the very latest from our political editor, Enda McLafferty, who's been following events closely. And evening to you. Just bring us right up to date, first of all, if you would. What are you hearing tonight?
Well, we're hearing, Mark, that DUP officer board meeting is going ahead tomorrow. There's very little detail around the timing or indeed the location of that gathering tomorrow. The last time round, the meeting was due to be held in the party headquarters in Dundela in Belfast. The media were camped outside and then the venue was changed at the last minute. And there is a reluctance, I think, by the DUP to have their officer board meetings under such a microscope. And I think we can expect something similar tomorrow. Now, speaking to some senior members within the party, there's a real sense, I think, that the DUP is now on the pathway back to devolution and it's about managing this particular process. I know Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, whenever he addressed his MLAs at the start of this week, he gave what some of them described as a pretty bullish performance. He was able to tell them some of what is in this proposed deal and according to some of the people in the room that he sold it quite well in terms of being able to measure it against the party's 7 tests. Now, that said, of course, we know there are still some unhappy within the party who feel that maybe this is a bit of a stretch for the DUP and they would like to see something more substantial perhaps before they would agree to return to the executive. But there's no doubt about it. I think Sir Geoffrey Donaldson is quite comfortable that he will have the majority of support among his officer board members and if there are dissenting voices there, I think he feels he can manage that opposition.
And you'd imagine, Enda, wouldn't you, that very quickly the focus is going to move on to what precisely is in the deal. What are you expecting?
Well, we know already from the exchange this week in the House of Commons between Rishi Sunak and the DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, the government is going to amend the UK Internal Markets Act to, in a sense, to future-proof and protect businesses in Northern Ireland trading into GB in case there's any divergence between EU and GB standards. Of course, that, though, is not really a game-changer, I don't think, for many unionists out there because they see the greater priority, of course, is for goods moving from GB into Northern Ireland because that's really when the full scale of the Irish Sea border comes into play with paperwork and checks and so on needed. And that is a constitutional issue indeed for many unionists. So although Geoffrey Donaldson might try and sell this move by the government to amend the UK Internal Markets Act as a big victory, others, of course, will not see it as that. We also know, Mark, as well, you'll remember back in Sir Geoffrey Donaldson's conference speech, he talked about this East-West Council and then there was a follow-up engagement with the Prime Minister about that as well. That's going to be in there now. Whether or not it's going to have decision-making powers, we await to see. Will it be a consultation body? That's something, of course, the DUP will try to avoid. We also know, of course, there may be other bodies in there to try and strengthen business links between Belfast and London, and there may well be a pot of money coming in alongside that as well. Now, we know legislation's coming, not just one piece, probably maybe 4 pieces we hear could be in the mix, and one of them might well be to reaffirm Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, an attempt to try and, if you like, restore that active union, of course, which has caused so much concern among unionists out there. And then, of course, there are other elements. There will probably be a nod to the Stormont break, which we know is already in the Windsor framework, and that will be to try and offset any concerns about any future EU rules coming in and will be applying in Northern Ireland. And then, of course, as well, Mark, there's this issue about unionists having their fingerprints over the operation of the Irish Sea border. This was something Sammy Wilson talked about in the past. He says no self-respecting unionist could have anything to do with it. Well, there could be a possibility that London indeed could step in and play a greater role on how that whole operation is managed.
And could we just talk finally, Enda, about timeline. When do you think we might see the Westminster legislation you've talked about? Or indeed, when could we get to the stage of Stormont ministers finally being appointed again? Well,
it feels like we have two timelines in play right now, Mark. The government, of course, are working to the timeline of next Tuesday. That's whenever Westminster breaks for its Christmas recess. The government very keen to get this over the line by then. I think in their scenario, what would happen is that the DUP officer board would meet. They then would get the nod from Sir Geoffrey Donaldson that the party's up for returning to Stormont. Then a letter would go to the Speaker to recall the Assembly early next week. The Speaker would be elected, new Speaker. Then we'd have the First and Deputy First Ministers installed and the remainder of the executive positions filled at that point as well. You might well then see an improved offer from the Treasury, Mark, to coincide with all of this to try and sweeten the deal. That might offset some of the concerns about public sector pay. You could, for instance, see some of the strikes being planned, being called off. So I think that's the idea that the government is pushing for, and that is the timeline the government is pushing for. Against that, there are those within the DUP still insisting this is not possible before Christmas. There's too much ground to cover, the party maintains. Although one senior member within the party said to me that if Sir Geoffrey Donaldson feels he has this package now, what would be the benefit in the DUP leader holding off for 3 weeks when MPs return again to Westminster in January?
OK, that's a very good upsum of where we are. And thanks very much indeed for that. Let's bring in tonight's studio guests. Sir David Stirling is a former head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Claire Hanna is the SDLP MP for South Belfast. Robbie Butler is the Deputy Leader of the Ulster Unionist Party. Andrew Muir is the Alliance Party's Stormont Chief Whip. And John Finucane is the Sinn Féin MP for North Belfast. Of course, we did ask the DUP to send someone along too, but the party said no. Welcome to all of you and thank you for being here. John Finucane, first of all, your party said earlier this week that the negotiations between the DUP and the government on the Windsor framework were over. What does the deal look like as far as you understand it?
Well, I would understand that the parameters for any deal need to be very clear, that they can't undermine the Good Friday Agreement. They can't undermine the withdrawal agreement either. I think that's something that the European Union would know, that the American administration would know. They've obviously been on the record saying that any negotiations in and around this can't undermine the Good Friday Agreement.
Are you pretty relaxed that that's OK, I think that's been taken into account?
That's clearly the parameters. And not only am I confident that the Europeans would know that and the Americans would know that, I'm confident that the British government would understand that those are the parameters as well. So like everybody else, we will wait and see what's in the detail if and when.
But your party must know what's in the detail. You must know, sitting at this table, what is in the deal.
Well, I've set out what I understand the parameters are, but what I would say is what we have been consistently saying for a very long time, which is that last year's election must be respected. There is a clear question mark hanging over the DUP regarding their commitment to power sharing, whether they will say that they are in no hurry but be blind and deaf to the extreme hardship that people are facing, not least our public sector workers.
Well, the DUP might just be about to sign up to a deal.
Well, and that is what we all wish to see. We wish to see them around the executive table with us and the other parties that will be there, tackling the many problems that grow on a daily basis.
Well, let me ask you this question. If Sinn Féin knows what's in the deal, does it meet the DUP's 7 tests?
Well, look, I'm not here to speak on behalf of the DUP, as I said.
I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of the DUP. I'm asking you, does it meet the DUP's 7 tests?
I think with respect, you are asking me to speak on behalf of the DUP when I have to commentate on whether something does or doesn't meet the 7 tests.
Well, you know what the 7 tests are. You obviously know what's in the deal. As far as you understand it, does the deal meet the DUP's 7 tests?
What I will say is that there, from our point of view, and again, I can repeat it tonight, from our point of view, there never has been and there is no excuse now for the DUP not to be taking their place in an assembly and an executive.
Yeah, well, we've heard you say that many times over the last 22 months.
Well, I think that, to be fair, I think it's a point that bears repeating at times, especially when we see the situation the public sector workers and their families find themselves in, when we see people who are on waiting lists. We all meet these people on a daily basis. They do not have the luxury of time, even though Geoffrey Donaldson may well say that he is not in any hurry. What the people want to see is an executive and assembly formed without delay so that we can begin to tackle the problems that are there, that we all know about, that grow on a daily basis. And that is what I think needs to be repeated. OK,
let's bring in Andrew Muir from the Alliance Party. Where does your party believe things sit tonight?
I think it's pretty clear that decision time is approaching very quickly for the DUP.
And Geoffrey Donaldson has admitted that.
And I think yes, and I think the people of Northern Ireland are a bit tired of this, that this is, in the last 7 years, there's only been an executive over Christmas for 2. And I think people are fed up with that situation and they want to see institutions restored, but on a stable basis. And that is absolutely essential, because if we want to have stable finances, we need to have stable institutions. And that's why we're very clear that there should be reforms of the institutions, so we're not stuck in this situation nearly every Christmas. I
mean, you were involved in some of the talks during this week. Are you clear about the contents of the deal as it's sitting on the table at the moment? It's clearly not signed off. We can't refer to it as the deal because the DUP hasn't agreed to it. But it's pretty obvious, talking to people off the record and hearing what Enda had to say, that there's something substantial on the table. So
we're very clear on the key principles of the deal. There's a number of queries that went back to the NAO and Treasury. There's been a consensus amongst the parties of where the gaps are in relation to that. I believe those gaps can be closed in relation to this deal, which gives us stable finances going forward. And to be honest, what's been clear as part of this process as well is that the lack of an executive has been an inhibitor in terms of us being able to have those fiscal powers to be able to help the people and businesses of Northern Ireland.
We'll come around to the finances in a moment or two and talk about that in quite a bit more detail. But just listening to what you say, it strikes me that a reasonable question is, are the 5 parties now engaged in these talks, including the DUP, which isn't represented here tonight, and that's the party's own choice, effectively all on the same side in the negotiations with the British government?
So I left Hillsborough Castle yesterday with a clear impression the parties were on the same page on the key issues that we wanted to see delivery from Treasury. For example, Treasury has conceded a fiscal floor, has conceded that we've been funded below need, and one of our issues is that that fiscal floor needs to be delivered on the same basis of Wales in terms of it being baseline to the beginning of the current spending review.
So
the parties are on the same page on that, and I think that is a positive, and the NAO and Treasury need to deliver upon those requests, because they're about delivering for the people and businesses here in Northern Ireland.
OK, just yes or no to this, if you would. Would you be really surprised if the DUP didn't go for this deal at this stage?
I think it would be absolutely disgraceful if we're going to go through another Christmas.
That's not the answer to my question. Would you be surprised if the DUP didn't go for it?
To be honest with the DUP, I am a bit tired and fed up with their playing around with this process for nearly 2 years, and their ability to look at things which are an opportunity for Northern Ireland and turn their back on it. The Windsor Framework was negotiated. It delivers benefits for the people of Northern Ireland, and the DUP response to that was extremely disappointing. And it's about time they actually realised the benefits that are delivered to Northern Ireland from a restored Assembly and an executive.
Robbie Butler, would you be surprised if the DUP said no at the end of this process?
In Northern Ireland, we're well used to political underachievement, sadly, and as Andrew's pointed out, we've had political dysfunction here now for upwards of 5 years out of 7, and I think the deal will be done. I have to be honest.
Do you think the DUP will go for it?
I do believe they will go for it. I do believe that there is a bit of choreography this week, but we have to decouple the 2 issues here, Mark. I think it's fair to say that the parties that are entitled to a position at the executive have been working on this fiscal piece actually for some 18 months now with the head of the civil service. So this didn't come out of nowhere. So this piece of work is something that we can agree on.
Okay.
Obviously,
so you think it's a reasonable deal? What's sitting there at the moment is reasonable enough?
Certainly it is, from the Treasury having accepted that a fiscal floor is a good starting point. We're not quite there yet with the total amount. And
but it's shaping up to be a good deal.
It's shaping up to be a good deal.
And isn't that because of the DUP playing hardball? Because if it had been up to the Ulster Unionists, you'd have rolled over months ago.
Absolutely not, because as I said, we need to decouple the 2 issues. This is shouldn't be seen as a bung. This is the potential executive parties having worked collegiately with the civil service for around 18 months on this issue, because the Treasury to actually come here in person to talk about this deal is actually quite significant.
But it's much more than just a financial deal, because Enda walked us through all of the other issues about East-West councils and the Stormont break and the amendment to the UK internal markets. All of that is also part of this deal, and you weren't really interested in playing hardball as far as any of that was concerned.
That's absolutely untrue.
Tell me how it's untrue. It's absolutely true.
It's absolutely untrue. So what we have said from the start is that we didn't accept Brexit. We warned about Brexit. We warned about the protocol. We also called out the framework. But what we said was we were not prepared to make the people of Northern Ireland the leverage and inflict pain on the people of Northern Ireland as leverage to see that change. We have been consistently calling for changes to each of those actions by the sovereign government at Westminster, and we've said we will also transform Northern Ireland at the same time. And if any unionist is serious about protecting the union, they need to be making people's lives better here and not impacting further pain.
Claire Hanna, you as an MP, of course, have a very particular Westminster perspective on these talks. Are you hearing from the other parties there that this deal is all but done at this stage?
I think that's the sense, that most of the ducks are in a row, if you will. Obviously, we have in this place got a history of missing opportunities to take opportunities. But yes, I think I very much do think that's the case. I've spent a lot of the last 2 years being asked to speculate and psychoanalyse members of the DUP, and I can't do that. But I would. You ask the others if they'd be. I'd be very surprised if this didn't land before Christmas, because it's desperately
before Christmas.
I believe so. It's possible to do it, and why wait? People are desperate to know that help is at hand, that somebody is interested in being in charge, and that things will be brighter in the new year. It also gives
Westminster
people
rises
space to get their
for the Christmas break, of course, on Tuesday. That is a very tight turnaround. It
is a very tight turnaround. Monday and Tuesday are light on the business. It would be possible, I believe, to put things in if required. And I haven't seen any draft legislation, but I understand it's negative resolutions. It's not lengthy, chunky material. So I believe that's possible. It's all about the will, Mark. That's what this was always going to come down to.
And do you get a sense that Sir Geoffrey Donaldson and the people close to him, who we understand want to make this happen, have got the wind in their backs, let's put it that way, and feel that they can get this across the line?
I mean, I genuinely can't answer that question, but what I do know is that the vast majority of people here want it to work. Everybody needs it to work, and I think there are very, very few people, other than the right of unionism and angry people on the internet, who don't think that this is the right thing to do and past the right time to do it.
Sir David Stirling, you, of course, have been involved in processes like this in the past from the inside. What does this look like to you from the outside?
Yeah, I am an outsider now, but I have to say there's a lot of this is very reminiscent of 4 years ago, late December 2019, early January 2020. The mood music seems similar. The fact that the Treasury are here and outlining a financial package all suggests to me that the government must at least feel that this is very close to the end game. Nothing can ever be certain, because I equally remember February 2018 when we were preparing first day briefs for ministers to come back within a matter of hours, if not days. And again, that opportunity was lost. So, but as I say, it does feel much more positive now. And I think the government will be wanting to do everything it can to get this over the line in the next week, because I've heard some people say, well, maybe we could let it go into the new year. But history shows, experience shows that, if you allow too much time between getting close to the end and actually getting over the line, the mice can get at it.
So it can be unpicked. We've seen that in the past where
can happen, which can just throw things.
Yeah, an embryonic deal has been sitting on the table and has been unpicked. So you think it makes more sense for this to happen start or middle of next week rather than 3 weeks after that?
I think what I see, and again, I am an outsider, is I just get the sense that the parties all individually now have reached this place where they feel now is the time to do this deal, including the DUP. OK. Political
agreement to go back in is, of course, one thing. Making the finances work when the parties do go back is another. And that is the big challenge. Let's move on to that conversation, because it's absolutely critical, isn't it?
It is, and again, I think it's hugely significant that we have seen this package outlined, and there are big numbers here, and it clearly is several significant sums of money.
Big
it's
numbers,
clearly
but
not
a lot
enough.
Of the parties seem to say not big enough.
Indeed, and I think my own analysis, informed by conversations with a variety of people, suggest it's going to fall short of what Northern Ireland really needs to provide us with a sustainable basis to develop a programme for government, fund that and move on, and not be back to the Treasury again in another year or two. But as I say, there's something positive to be built upon here, And I'm pretty sure, again, based on my own past experience, that the government would not have put its best and final offer on the table first off.
Okay, so there may yet be a little bit more wriggle room, you think?
They will deny that, but experience shows otherwise.
Okay, right, and a few nods around the table from others as well. Let's just bring in the economist, Dr. Lisa Wilson from the Nevin Institute, who's been looking at these numbers in the last few days. We've had clear indication from people on our panel tonight, Lisa, that the numbers aren't quite big enough and that maybe there is the capacity for additional resources to be put on the table as well. What do you make of the package, first of all, that the government tabled on Monday past?
It's fantastic that they've finally tabled a package which recognises that Northern Ireland has been, public services are currently underfunded. But I suppose in terms of the financial package of 2.5 billion, as David has just said, it is reminiscent of 2019, where we talked about large sums of money and getting to the technical details or getting to the small print effectively. Economists are still short in the detail to be able to give a full sense of analysis of, will this be enough? And will this be able to put Northern Ireland's public finances onto a more sustainable footing? It is still very unclear. The package came is being talked about as coming in various different aspects. 600 million for public sector pay, over a billion on stability fund, 600 million in transformation. I think to your viewers, it is perhaps unclear that this isn't, an upfront new pot of money in many instances. Some of it is repackaged money. Some of this is to be spent over a number of years. So it's not just, about Northern Ireland being given 2.5 billion tomorrow. And I get that it's difficult for viewers sitting at home, nurses, the public sector workers going on strike tomorrow, who are looking at the possibility of getting a public sector pay deal for them to say, you just need to get back to work. But the seriousness of this issue and the seriousness of getting the needs-based factor of this right and the number right really will impact into the long term and whether or not this is a sustainable package. We don't want this to just be a stable package in terms of stabilising our public funding. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to be enough. And the 124 on accounts that have been done by based on the Holdham Commission, but alterations to the policing and justice figure, also the taxable capacity, which suggests that actually our needs-based floor should be between 127 and 130. So the 124 is about where we're at now. So to suggest that it's a panacea or the silver bullet, it stands to be questioned.
Yeah, well, the fiscal floor certainly has been discussed a lot, but the very fact that the government appears to have moved and made an offer on that so quickly when it took so long to be sorted out in Wales is an interesting development. I need to ask you about revenue raising because it is very clear from the Treasury when it talks about the need, for example, for rates to be increased by 15%. I don't know if that's going to be the final figure or not. We'll see, I suppose, in due course. But whatever about that, the Treasury clearly believes that Northern Ireland politicians back in office at Stormont need to think seriously and deliver on some kind of revenue raising. Do you think that is necessary and is deliverable on here?
This is a conversation that's been going on for decades now. Northern Ireland's it's given too much money and raises too little. The NRI has put together some data and it's based on an estimate of tax to GDP comparisons, and it's a comparison which is used right across European countries to compare their tax capacity based on their economy. And when we've done that, what we've seen is Northern Ireland is overtaxed compared to the rest of the UK. We've seen the recent autumn statement and they used the tax to GDP ratio as the basis on which to cut taxes at UK level. So the Northern Ireland tax GDP ratio has been above that ratio, and we've never heard this before. We've always been told we raise too little. But based on the size of our economy, the tax to GDP ratio is actually above that of the UK and above that of the EU average. And we really need to burst this bubble where Northern Ireland doesn't pay its fair share. It's not just, different measures can tell you different aspects of the story. And so I think that it's a really serious issue that, Northern Ireland is being suggested that they don't contribute their fair share, because that data would suggest otherwise.
OK, Lisa, thanks very much. I want to come back to my panel here. John Finucane, there is an argument, and you'll have heard it many times before, and I think the Treasury, as I understand it, subscribes to this view that on the issue of rates, for example, we don't pay as much for our rates here in Northern Ireland as we would pay if we were living in GB. And presumably that is why the Treasury says that there should be a rates hike of something in the region of 15%. Are you trying to make that go away in these negotiations?
No, well, there's a couple of interesting things that came from your conversation with Lisa, and I don't think we should brush over what she said about the fact that people here, in the context of GDP, pay consistently much higher in tax than anywhere else on these islands. So that's a starting point. We also have the quite dramatic acceptance this week by the British Secretary of State that this place has been underfunded. We and others have obviously criticised Tory austerity for a number of years. So you don't solve a problem like underfunding by then taxing the people who are getting hit the hardest at the minute in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The way to solve this is, as you would probably expect me to say, to have our Assembly and Executive up and running to consider the proposals that were contained within the Fiscal Commission's report earlier on this year, to look at the way in which we can build our economy and can raise revenue without going to the lazy Tory tired and tried again practice of punishing those who are already punished time and time again.
So does that mean that you will want to target any increased payments on what you would regard as those who have the broad shoulders to be able to pay it? So would you like to see, for example, a lifting of the domestic rate cap at this point? Some people have said that's a good idea because it would raise quite a small amount of money.
In the context, and Andrew touched on this earlier, but in the context of the financial package that was presented this week, there is essentially a united front counter to that. And the detail will be in that. With regards to those decisions, I want to see those decisions being taken around an executive table. It's not for me tonight to cherry pick what you would and what you wouldn't do. Okay. But the premise from the start of this is not to just accept the lazy Tory policy and narrative that we must go immediately to punish those who are already being punished and feeling the brunt of an underinvestment for decades.
Okay, Andrew Muir. Is that what you're doing in the Alliance Party? Because you've said that you are prepared to engage seriously with the concept of revenue raising, and I don't know where you stand specifically on the domestic rates cap, but removing that cap entirely, as I understand it, in a best case scenario, maybe sounds good. It's going to raise £11 million. It's a tiny amount of money when you're talking about hundreds of millions of need.
Exactly, and to me, when you're approaching public finances, the first thing you look at before you pull the lever of tax rises is how we're spending our money. And we're wasting at least £400 million a year in the cost of division. So we think we should look at terms of how we're spending our money. We're up for a review in terms of rates. We're up for a review in relation to transformation of our public services. But just to move towards the lever of revenue raising initially, is the wrong way to go. If the UK government are saying we've been funded below our need and they're saying they're prepared to look at introducing a fiscal floor, our argument is they need to do that exactly like they did in Wales and baseline that to the beginning of the spending review. What you shouldn't be doing in the context of that is then punishing people and businesses in Northern Ireland in terms of a 15% rate rise.
Can I just check, is this off the table then? The £11 million we've talked about, £20 million if you reintroduce prescription charges, start charging for domiciliary care could bring in £32 million. I mean, we know water charges could bring in something in the region of £350 million. That's a huge amount of money. Should that be on the table? Should politicians, going back to Stormont, be prepared to consider issues like that seriously?
Well, do you want me to tell you something, Mark? See, in relation to all of that, It's all on the table if the DUP don't go back into the executive, and that's been made very, very clear to us. And the 15% rate rise, if the DUP say no to going back, I can almost guarantee viewers here tonight that will be happening next year.
So at least your point is at least there's some influence if politicians are back in Stormont, and if they're not back in Stormont, the NIO is going to take those decisions and there'll be no influence. Is that how you see it, Robbie Butler?
Well, I think what was interesting in the discussions, and I don't think I'll be revealing anything that's not already in the news cycles, is that the inference that a 15% interest rate hike was what they wanted isn't actually a true picture. What they were suggesting was that Northern Ireland needs, and the government here needs to step into a system of revenue raising to secure that sustainability and transformation. But
are you talking about, sorry, just to be clear, because you talk about interest rates, I think you've got 15%
on
rates rise.
On the rates rise, yes.
On rates, okay.
And the difficulty is when you're talking to Treasury, that's okay, but as Andrea said, they've already conceded that Northern Ireland is underfunded. We have lower spending power here in Northern Ireland. It'd be really unfair for the politicians here who haven't earned the credit with the electorate out there, then to go and say, you will pay for our political dysfunction. So there's two things we need to do, is create that trust with Treasury for this uplift in the fiscal money, but also to get round the table in a programme for government and discuss the ways that we can look at actually saving money within public services. Efficiencies, absolutely. Okay. Efficiencies, revenue saving before we then go to the electric and businesses to raise that.
Okay, I'll come to you in a second, Claire, but David Sterling, you are on the record as saying that revenue raising is something that needs to be seriously looked at, and presumably efficiencies as well. Are our politicians frit when it comes to discussing that issue seriously and having to go to their voters and say, sorry folks, you're going to have to dig deeper in your pockets if you want to live in a big house, or if you want to have domiciliary care, or if you need to go and get a prescription from the chemist?
Nobody wants to pay more tax or more charges. I think there's two issues here. Firstly, there's a clear issue that Northern Ireland is not getting the funding it needs on the basis of need here. And that's, I think, been conceded even by UK government. So I think the strongest case possible needs to be made to make sure we maximise the amount that we get back from Treasury through the Barnett mechanism. And, you know, a good start has been made here, but more needs to be done.
And can I pause you for 1 second? Yeah. Is it possible for the UK government to put the genie back in the bottle and to say, on the one hand, we concede that there needs to be a fiscal floor, we concede that Northern Ireland needs more funding, and if then politicians decide that they can't get back into Stormont again, for the government to walk away and say, well, then you can't have that extra money, we've changed our mind.
Purely a personal view, but the genie is out of the bottle. Okay. I do not think...
So the government can't walk back from this one?
I do not think they can take it away.
That's interesting.
And not least because the Northern Ireland departments are projected to overspend by 400 million this year, and there's no ability to pay the 600 million that is due workers. But my second point was, it's on the one hand, we've got to make the strongest case to get the maximum amount for Northern Ireland, but we then got to have a debate about how best we use the money that we get. And within that debate, there needs to be a sensible argument or sensible discussion about the amount which we all pay as citizens towards public services. And my own view would be that there are a lot of people here who could afford to pay a little bit more for public services, for a better health service, for better schools. And that needs to be a serious discussion, not in the political climate that the Secretary of State has created at the moment. OK, and it may be a difficult one for politicians to engage in, but that's a conversation for another day. Claire, I want to ask you finally, when you, if Stormont comes back again and your party engages in the process, you would, of course, be on the opposition benches. So to what extent are you outside the conversation that we've just engaged in here, inevitably criticising the other parties for decisions they're going to take?
Well, look, we will be in opposition. We were in the talks on Monday and the technical briefings on Tuesday, and we've removed ourselves from that and made clear that we were in a different political role. Most oppositions are trying to bring a government down. We're desperately trying to get one up and going. So, yes, we will be opposing. We will be doing so constructively. We will be doing so because that's the message the electorate sent last May, and we want to respect that. But we'll also be doing it because it'll be good for this place. It'll be healthy to have an opposition, and it'll be good for democracy.
Keep these guys on their toes.
Well, I mean, nobody would tell you the place has been going particularly well. So, yes, there's a big conversation about the funding. There's a big conversation about reform of services and certainly reform of the Assembly. But there's a massive conversation about political culture. It hasn't been healthy, it hasn't been constructive, it hasn't been transparent, and we're quite excited about our new role in opposition and trying to bring some of those improved practices into Stormont.
OK, we're out of time, folks. Really interesting conversation. Thank you all very much indeed for coming in to join us tonight. Let's get some analysis from three people who've been watching events very closely in the past few days and listening to our conversation tonight. Ben Lowry is the editor of the newsletter, Suzanne Breen's the political editor of the Belfast Telegraph, and Noel Doran is, of course, the editor of the Irish News. Welcome to all of you. Ben, can I just start with you? Do you get a sense that Sir Geoffrey's about to jump?
I do get a sense that he is moving towards trying to go back to Stormont. And I think that this has been a process that really began in earnest in the DUP conference speech in the middle of October. There have been a number of aspects since then. And then a shift in the rhetoric towards talking about money. That was very significant as well. And the question now is when this push will be attempted. My understanding of the party officer meeting, this is the 12 members of the party are the most powerful members of the party.
Tomorrow, we think?
Yes, it is tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think it's unusual for there to be a meeting on Friday. I would imagine that Sir Geoffrey is going to be testing the water. I did speak to somebody today who said, you know, very serious questions are going to be asked. But what I actually think is happening is we are sort of coming towards the split that's been there for a long time, because these talks have not, since the Windsor Framework, been talking about getting rid of EU law. So the question is this: what is the size of the split? What is the manifestation of the split? And you know, how will it work out from that? What I cannot see happening, and I think it's important that your viewers do hear another view to this, because we had a very sort of upbeat assessment from the panel. Obviously, the DP chose not to come on, so that's understandable. We had an economist saying that much more money than was even offered this week is needed, something, incidentally, I would entirely reject. But anyway, there are other arguments to this. But I think that the DUP split is there, and it's just a question of what it's going to be in the officer numbers. Is it going to be a 7-5 vote in favour of this? Is it going to be an 8-4? Is it going to be a 6-6? I do think there's a majority for going back. Okay. I think there's always been a majority.
Suzanne, can you shed any light on that? Do you have any sense as to what the numbers might look like, or if there even will need to be a vote within that officer group?
Well, sources on both sides of the divide tell me that the party officer meeting tomorrow, it's not D-Day, that this is more the leaders sussing out where people stand, trying to kind of test them to see what it would take to get it over the line. I don't know if I believe that, because I see the rationale that could be there for a quick deal, but that's what people on both sides of the divide are telling me. I think Geoffrey Donaldson may have a majority, but I think that there are certainly 5 party officers that he will find it quite difficult potentially to convince. Lord Morrow, the party chairman, a veteran, very traditional unionist, Michelle McIlveen, there had been a move on by the leadership to replace her on the party officer team. That backfired. It didn't work. It didn't come to fruition. I don't think she'll particularly be there to do her leader any favours. We've got Edwin Poots, who potentially could be a kingmaker. He is, as we know, a fundamentalist on social issues, but politically he is a pragmatist. I think he might want to see Stormont up and running. But the question is, will he be minded to do Geoffrey Donaldson any favours, given the personal history between them? While he mightn't oppose a deal, will he actually come out and support one? Will he ride to Geoffrey's rescue? Will he be standing side by side with him as he tries to sell it to grassroots? The other 2 key people are Lord Dodds and Sammy Wilson. They have been the most vocal against the protocol, against the Windsor Framework, and I think the party leadership will be hoping that if they have a majority in support of going back to Stormont, that there will be the courtesy of silence from Lord Dodds and Sammy Wilson. Now, sources are telling me tonight that with Lord Dodds, certainly he is very sceptical at the moment of what seems to be on the table, and the leadership can't rely on that. There are also people in the party who, I have to say, are enjoying the pressure Geoffrey Donaldson is under. One was singing down the phone today. It's beginning to look a lot like a sellout. So nobody should underestimate the problems that Geoffrey Donaldson is going to have in getting this across the line. Is he going to be like David Trimble, that he will settle for a majority of his top team and that he will go ahead even though there is a split, or will he want more unanimity?
Noel, interesting that Claire Hanna and David Stirling both talked about the logic from their point of view of a deal being done sooner rather than later. I just, first of all to you, as far as timing is concerned, does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I think people are almost desperate that it should take shape before Christmas. I think we can all see the mood changing in the DUP. The references to the 7 tests seem to have gone the same way as the records in some ministerial WhatsApp groups. We're just not talking about them anymore at all, and things have moved on decisively. There is a danger that we spend too much time talking about the DUP, of course, because although they're an important position, they're not the largest group at Stormont, and there is a danger that we spend too much time agonising over their position when there's a bigger argument going on over the economy.
Yeah, and finances are terribly important, of course, Noel. When a deal is done, you could say that that's when the hard work starts. And none of the politicians particularly jumping up and down with excitement at the prospect of having to start introducing revenue-raising measures.
It's a very difficult time, and if Jeffrey Donaldson can come up with a formula which gets us more money, well, everyone will be delighted. Perhaps he should give JP McManus a ring, because he seems to be in generous mood at the moment. There's not too much money coming from Rishi Sunak as far as we can see. It will come to dominate the whole argument as soon as the Assembly and the Executive is up and running, which we do believe is likely to be in the fairly near future.
Yeah, the finances are absolutely critical to all of this. You've said that you're not sure that the case can be made for more funding being necessary, but our economist is an expert in this particular area. She's done the sums and she thinks a very strong case can and should be made.
Yes, a lot of people think that Northern Ireland needs more money, but what we heard a little bit of it from the panel tonight. We're not hearing about the waste, the inefficiency, the political cowardice, the reluctance to ever take difficult decisions.
The duplication of services, of course. We saw that in education this very week when a panel said we're paying far too much money because we have a double system.
20 years of experts saying that we need to close certain units that might have higher death rates and introduce world-class units. Reform of healthcare. Our politicians won't do this. And that's pretty serious that there isn't any of that. I happen to think, and I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that the UK is extraordinarily generous to here, and a lot of it's been badly spent. For example, I'm a mild asthmatic. I don't need free prescriptions. A lot of stuff like that, the populism. And also, we're not even hearing any arguments
Tiny amounts of money, of course. Prescription charges being reintroduced would
But then you talked about water charges, which was a large amount of money.
350 million.
And we're not even hearing things like some of the arguments against strikes. You can be very pro-public sector workers and say, well, hold on a minute, 70%, almost even in Northern Ireland, of the population is not in the public sector, and almost no one in the private sector gets the pensions that people in the public sector do. We don't even hear Stormont politicians addressing that. So there's a lot of arguments to this which are slightly worrying about the return of Stormont, if there is a return to Stormont. But back on the money and your talk about, and Suzanne's points about the unhappiness with some people in the DUP, I'm aware of influential people in the DUP who are not happy at the tying of money, the bringing up of money, and the implication that unionists can always be bought. Just a quick word about transformation. We've talked about some of the financial issues involved in this package, or potentially involved in this package. Bengoa, the transformation of our health service, Suzanne, is already underway. It's happening, but it isn't happening at the scale or speed of what many people believe is necessary. Will our politicians have the appetite for that? Because parish pump is an issue that can really derail that process in the years ahead.
Well, they're going to have to. They're going to have to do much, much better than they did before. We saw in health piles of reports building up, but no action taken, no hard decisions. Northern Ireland can't afford that anymore. The health service is on its knees. People's lives are being lost. So if the executive is reformed, then our ministers are going to have to find a lot more courage than they have previously shown.
What do you make of that? I mean, in terms of transformation, healthcare, education, the changes that have been recommended to our education system in the years ahead, very dramatic and potentially, I suppose, saving money, but maybe expensive to implement in the short term. Are our politicians up for that? Does the public have an appetite for that kind of change, do you think, Noel?
They probably don't at the moment, but then we're in this very unusual position where we have so seldom had an administration in place over recent years, so the debate hasn't really taken place. Ben puts his case forward firmly. I think he's probably in a minority when he thinks we're getting too much money from Westminster. I think many people will believe that that argument is going to have to be developed and that we are going to have to find other revenue streams very, very quickly. But that can only happen in the context of a restored, devolved Assembly.
Suzanne, we've about 30 seconds here. I want to ask you about a tweet from a founding member of the DUP, Wallace Thompson, and to what extent it might say something about the opposition that the DUP might have to deal with in the days, maybe weeks ahead. This is what he said. I note that a certain unionist blogger of much younger vintage than me is doing what I used to always do when a deal was done. He's quoting Kipling's Ulster 1912 and warning of betrayal. I'm older and wiser now, he says.
Yes, and Jimmy Bryson would be completely irrelevant if there wasn't a split in the DUP. If the party was united, then Jimmy Bryson and Jim Allister, people wouldn't be paying attention to them. But there are voices in the DUP who make very similar arguments to both men. OK, we've got to leave it there, folks. Thank you very much indeed. That's just about all we've got time for. A quick reminder about the latest episode of our Red Lines podcast. This week we're taking a look back at the big political moments of 2023, the highs, the lows and the laughs. You'll find that on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. That's it for tonight. I'll be back with a specially extended Sunday Politics this weekend at the usual time of 10 o'clock here on BBC One. Do join me for that. But that is the last view before Christmas. We'll be back in the new year. Let's see if Stormont is too. For now, though, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Have a good night. From all of us, bye-bye.